Today we're continuing our reading of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, entitled The Status Quo, Chapter 6, entitled Creation of the Universal Form. And my understanding is that we're on text 7 today. Please repeat. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Text number 7, please repeat. Savai Vishvasrajam Garba.
Savai Vishvasrajam Garbo.
Savai Vishvasrajam Garba.
Savai Vishvasrajam Garbo.
Deva Karmatma Shaktiman.
Deva Karmatma Shaktiman.
Deva Karmatma Shaktiman.
Deva Karmatma Shaktiman.
Baba Jatmanatmana.
Vibhava Jatmanatmana.
Vibhava Jatmanatmana.
Vibhava Jatmanatmana.
Ekada Dashada Trida.
Ekada Dashada Trida.
Ekada Dashada Trida.
Ekada Dashada Trida.
Savai Vishvasrajam Garba.
Savai Vishvasrajam Garbo.
Deva Karmatma Shaktiman.
Deva Karmatma Shaktiman.
Vibhava Jatmanatmana.
Vibhava Jatmanatmana.
Ekada Dashada Trida.
Ekada Dashada Trida.
Now, because the kirtan before this went 8 minutes overtime, we're going to not do responsive chanting. I think Bhagavatam class is supposed to start at 7:30.
That's okay.
Isn't that a fact? Yeah, somehow we're always starting Bhagavatam class late. And,
Well,
and then people want to run away for breakfast prasadam. So we're going to skip that and we're going to go to word for word. Sa.
Sa. That.
By.
By.
Certainly.
Certainly.
Vishvasrajam.
Vishvasrajam.
Of the gigantic Virat form.
Of the gigantic Virat form.
Garba.
Garba.
Total energy.
Total energy.
Deva.
Deva.
Living energy.
Living energy.
Karma.
Karma.
Activity of life.
Activity of life.
Atma.
Atma.
Self.
Self.
Shaktiman.
Shaktiman.
Full with potency.
Full with potencies.
Vibhavaja.
Vibhavaja.
Divided.
Divided.
Atmana.
Atmana.
By himself.
By himself.
Atmanam.
Atmanam.
Himself.
Himself.
Ekada.
Ekada.
In oneness.
In oneness.
Dashada.
Dashara.
In 10.
In 10.
Trida.
Trida.
And in 3.
And in 3.
We're going to read the translation and purport for our guests, Saif and Rasalila. We're reading this chapter called Creation of the Universal Form. And the great devotee Vidura, he's an extremely enlightened person. Yet, despite being a totally self-realized person, when he is in the presence of the guru named Maitreya, he acts like a proper disciple and inquires from Maitreya. He doesn't say, oh, I know everything. Right? We go out on book distribution sometimes, and sometimes we meet people from India. And, we're introducing Bhagavad Gita, mostly, but, Prabhupada's books. And we'll approach them with Prabhupada's books, such as Bhagavad Gita. Oh, I know all about Krishna. I know Bhagavad Gita. My grandma read that to me when I was a kid, and they're actually referring to Mahabharata or something. So Vidura is showing what the mood of a real disciple is. That even you obtain total self-realization and enlightenment, you ask questions. And his questions were not, hey, could you tell me about the nitty-gritty details of Krishna and the gopis' Rasa Leela? I want to know all about that. No, he started off with, how is this material world even here in the first place? Like, here we are in the material world and people seem to be suffering and, birth, death and all that. Like, where does it all come from? Where are we from? So you ask these kind of questions. So Maitreya is very happily receiving the questions of Vidura and proceeding to answer them. So we're on text 7. Let's just back up to the first 6 verses. We'll just read the translation so we can get a little bit up to speed. The chapter began with Maitreya saying, "The Lord thus heard about the suspension of the progressive creative functions of the universe due to the non-combination of his potencies, such as the Mahatattva." So what's happening is Maitreya in the previous chapter introduced the creation of the material world. And he said that the demigods, that is Lord Vishnu's administrative staff here in the material world, the demigods have this duty of bringing about further levels of creation. They're like the sub-creators, these got their little jobs to do. But they became perplexed because when they went to go do their function, the material elements weren't combining together. They were just sitting there all dormant and stagnant. We gave the example last week that if you go to the kitchen to bake a cake and you take the flour and the sugar and the butter and the spices, whatever you're putting in your cake, and you plop them all in the bowl together, but they just sit there. They don't mix. And you never end up with a cake. You just end up with the same old ingredients you started with. There's something wrong. So the demigods filed a little complaint that here's all the material elements, but they're not combining to produce stuff. So the Lord heard about that. They filed a little complaint to Lord Vishnu, and he understood. Oh, my Mahatattva. Mahatattva is the general term, Mahatattva. Mahatattva means the pool of all the material ingredients in their seed form. So the Lord heard about that. So then the next verse, Maitreya continues, "The Supreme Powerful Lord then simultaneously entered into the 23 elements." They're called 23 elements. Now you're going to say, I'm sorry, but I did take Chemistry 101, and the periodic table has like over 100 elements. So what are these primitive people? They only have 23 elements? So the Vedic scriptures don't list the elements as zinc and copper and hydrogen and nitrogen and silicon like that. But the Vedic literatures list 23 elements of the Mahatattva. And they are composed of, who knows? What are those 23 elements? Raise your hand if you want to list some of those 23 elements. I'll give you a hint, it's not zinc and copper. I'm sorry?
Was it the working senses?
5 working senses. And when we say the senses, we're not talking about these fleshy things like our ear and our eyes and not those fleshy things, but the subtle senses, the original subtle form of the senses. So yes, the ear, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the tactile sense, the skin.
The 5 knowledge.
So those are called the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. How do I know that there's something over there? Because I can see it or hear it or taste it. So those 5 knowledge acquiring senses are 5 of the elements. What other?
Water, fire, air.
Okay, then what's called the gross building blocks, which again are not hydrogen and nitrogen and carbon, but are listed as 5 water, air, fire, and ether or space. In case we're up to 10, you've got 13 more to go.
Mind, thought, syndrome.
Okay, then we have the subtle senses that make up the astral body, mind, intelligence, and ego. We've got 10 more to go.
Why working senses?
The 5 working senses, and again, it's not referring to this bag of bones and muscle. It's the subtle form of the senses. So the leg, for walking, the hands, the tongue, that's 3, the anus, and the genitals. That's 5 working senses. So we've got 5 left.
5 sense objects?
The 5 sense objects, like what's the object of the ear? Sound. What's the object of the eye?
Just
Sight, like that. Taste, smell, and the tactile objects. Okay, so the Vedic literature has described that the Mahatattva is composed of these basic 23 elements. So the Lord entered into them because the demigods complained that they weren't combining properly. They were just sitting there, refusing to work. So the Lord entered into the elements. So the essential point made here is nothing can function without the existence of the Lord. The essence of everything is Krishna. That's why in Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna's talking to Arjuna, he says things like, I am the taste of water. I am the original fragrance of the earth. I am the illumination of fire. I am the intelligence of the intelligent. Right? I am the strength of the strong, etc., etc. What is he saying? He's the essence of those things. Otherwise, those elements are just like a dead shell. H2O is water. Where's the taste there? Oh, here you go. Here's a bunch of hydrogen atoms, and here's a bunch of oxygen atoms. Put them together. Well, where does the taste come from? So Krishna says, I'm the essence. I am that essence. Without Krishna's presence, there would be no taste, etc. Okay, so the Lord entered them so the supreme powerful Lord then simultaneously entered into the 23 elements with the goddess Kali, his external energy, who alone amalgamates all the different elements. So Kali is Krishna's external energy. She's his agent. So it's not that Krishna really does work, right? Any important person doesn't do any work. I can tell that you are not an important person because you're working all day. You're not very important. The important person is the one who just sits there, doesn't do anything, right? Pushes a button over here, makes a little phone call over here, and the whole huge business is going on, or the nation or whatever they're in control of. So real important people don't do anything. They've got their agents that go out there, do all the work. So Kali, Krishna's external energy, does the work under him. All right, then Maitreya continues. Thus, when the personality of God had entered into the elements by his energy, all the living entities were enlivened into different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep. So, we all know when we're sleeping, doing nothing. And as soon as we wake up, we become very active, even if it's just talking active. So similarly, the living entities are said to be like asleep, in a comatose state, before the periodic creations of the material. Material world has its creation, maintenance, annihilation. Creation, maintenance, annihilation. Creation, maintenance, annihilation. It's going in a cycle. So when the material world is destroyed, it means all the elements go back into the Mahatattva ocean, if you will. What happens to the living entities? The soul never dies. Just because the universe disintegrates, and just because your body disintegrates doesn't mean that you die. So you, the soul, where do you go when there's no material world to hang out in? If you're not qualified to go to the spiritual world, what do? So what you do is you sleep, like in a very deep sleep, in the body of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. And then when creation comes again, it's like you wake up again and you get a material body. So that's why it says, when the material energy, when this personality of God entered into each element, all the living entities were enlivened into different activities, because now they've got the playground to play in, right? The material world's our playground. All right, Maitreya continues on text 4. When the 23 principal elements were set in action by the will of the Supreme, the gigantic universal form, or the Vishvarupa body of the Lord, came into existence. So the universal form is referring to this whole cosmos. And this whole cosmos is considered to be as one of the bodies of the Lord. It's called Virat Rupa. Rupa means form. Vishva or Virat means universal. Rupa means form. And the Lord of that universe, Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, is called Vishva or Virat Purusha, the person of the universe. So he's entered into the elements of the universe, and the whole cosmos is manifested, and it's likened as to one of his bodies. Text 5. As the Lord, in his plenary portion, entered into the elements of the universal creation, they transformed into the gigantic form in which all the planetary systems and all movable and immovable creations rest. The scientists are trying to figure out, how in the heck did that happen? They say we started off with an infinitesimally small something, and in it was packed an infinite amount of energy. And that infinitesimally small something couldn't handle all that infinite amount of energy, so it busted open one day. It's called the Big Bang. And everything just took off like dominoes after that. And here we are. Right? Well, that's not what the Vedic literature says. The Vedic literature says that when the Lord entered the elements, then they transformed and they produced the gigantic body of the Lord, which is the universe that we see, the cosmos. Text 6. The gigantic Virat Purusha, this means the person of the universe, that's the Supreme Lord. His name is Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. He's the Lord of the cosmos. The gigantic Virat Purusha, also known as Haran Maya is another name, lived for 1,000 celestial years on the water of the universe, and all the living entities lay with him. So it's explained, just like in an egg, like chickens hatch from an egg, they sit inside the egg. And I'm sorry to report that we did this experiment when we were like in 7th grade for our science class. We had to buy fertilized eggs, from a farm. And then I forget how many days it takes, like 2 weeks or something, whatever. Let's say it's 2 weeks for the chick to hatch from the fertilized egg. We had to take, we bought 15 eggs, and we had to every day break the egg open and see what the stage was. Sorry. And as a kid, I was really a kid, I was like 7th grade, kind of like a kid, whatever. I was like, oh, let them hatch and we'll have little baby chickens, But we weren't allowed to do that. So, you break the egg open on the first day, just like, eggs you buy in the grocery store, maybe a little drop of blood in there or something. Then the 2nd day, 3rd day, 4th day, and you could see the stages. It went from just being like a liquid to like an embryo forming, and by the 13th day or 12th, however many days it was, there was a chicken in there, a little chickie with without feathers, and blah, blah, blah. So, similarly, the universe is like an egg, and it's filled with liquid. Half of it's filled with liquid, and half of it's filled with air. So on that liquid, it's called the Garbodak Ocean. And the Lord of the universe, the Vishva Purusha, he lies on that ocean, and he's just floating there, like taking a nap. And it says for 1,000 celestial years. That's not 1,000 of our years. 1,000 celestial years turns out in our years to be 4.32 million years. So that Vishvapurusha is lying there, and things aren't really happening yet. So all the living entities are lying in his body in a deep sleep. That's a long nap. No wonder why when we come out, we don't remember it. I don't remember my past life. What? I don't remember there being past creations. This is all fairy tales. If there were past creations, don't you think I'd have past life remembrances and remember? But you go to sleep for millions and sometimes billions of years, you're supposed to have a memory. I mean, I can't even remember what I did last Wednesday, So all the living entities lay with him, like asleep. Now today's verse says, the total energy of the Mahatattva in the form of the gigantic Bharat Rupa divided himself by himself. See, the Vedic literature says there is nothing but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There's no other. There's nothing extraneous. Like if I want to interact, to do something, I have to go get some extraneous sense object to interact with, or some other person to interact with. But in the beginning, we don't want to use the word in the beginning because there is no beginning, but ontologically, in the beginning, there's nothing but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And from him comes all the different energies, spiritual energies, marginal energies, material energies. From him come all other beings. All the, from Krishna, ultimately, comes all the different Vishnu expansions, all the demigods, all the species in the material world. Everything comes from Krishna. So in that sense, there's nothing but Krishna. Right? If everything comes from Krishna, then there's nothing extraneous to Krishna. So in one sense, everything is Krishna. But only in one sense. Because Krishna manifests everything and everybody in such a way so that he can interact with them, so that they appear to be another, so that they appear to be extraneous. Because how are you going to experience love if the only thing that exists is you? Love is an exchange. I can't say I love you unless I exchange with you somehow. I give you a gift, or I accept the gift. I feed you, or you feed me. Like that. There's an exchange. There's something that you do. You love your children. You don't just tell your kids, I love you, I love you, I love you. But meanwhile, their clothes are dirty, they're starving, they're cold. You do stuff for them. That's how you express your love. That's actual love. So Krishna wants nothing but love. That's all he thrives. Like plants only need water. You don't feed them rice and dal and pottage. You just feed them water. So Krishna, he only eats one thing, and that is love. So he creates all living beings so that he can exchange love. So, but because we all come from him, you could say everything is Krishna. But only in that one sense, that everything emanates from him. But everything is not Krishna because we're not the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We're just a teeny spark. And we're meant simply to exchange love with him. So here, today's verse is kind of like one of these, oh wow, man, this is far out philosophy verses. Like hard to understand. It says, the total energy of the Mahatattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself by himself, but there's nothing else, right? Into the consciousness of the living entities, the life of activity, and self-identification, which are subdivided into 1, 10, and 3 respectively. So we're just going to read the purport and then see if there's any questions. In a nutshell, it says that the life of activity is subdivided into just one, consciousness. And the consciousness is subdivided only into one, consciousness. The life of activity into 10, because there's 10 life airs that circulate in the body. And then self-identification into 3, because the false ego is affected, it comes in 3 flavors. False ego in the mode of ignorance, false ego in the mode of passion, false ego in the mode of goodness. So Prabhupada's purport. Consciousness is the sign of the living entity, or the soul. The existence of the soul is manifest in the form of consciousness, called Jnana Shakti. The total consciousness is that of the gigantic Virata Rupa, and the same consciousness is exhibited in individual persons. The activity of consciousness is performed through the air of life, which is of 10 divisions. The airs of life are called prana, apana, udana, vyana, and samana, and are also differently qualified as naga, kurma, krikara, devadatta, and dhananjaya. The consciousness of the soul becomes polluted by the material atmosphere, and thus various activities are exhibited in the false ego of bodily identification. These various activities are described in Bhagavad Gita 241 as Bahu Shaka Yanantascha Buddhayo Vyavasayanam. Means a many-branched consciousness. Our consciousness is supposed to just be one, which is fixated on this loving service of the Lord. But our consciousness currently is Bahu Shaka, or many-branched. The conditioned soul is bewildered into various activities for want of pure consciousness. In pure consciousness, the activity is one, namely Krishna consciousness. The consciousness of the individual soul becomes one with the supreme consciousness when there's complete synthesis between the two. That means we're on the same page with each other in loving relationship. The monist, those who believe that ultimately everything is just one indescribable it. The monist believes that there's only one consciousness, whereas the sattvatas, or devotees, believe that although there is undoubtedly one consciousness, they are one because there is agreement. You have your consciousness, I have my consciousness. But we're in one consciousness when, as a loving unit, we're on the same page. Therefore, you often see husband and wife don't say he and I or she and I, but they say we. We are going to the store, or two friends, or whatever relationship there is. We are buying a house. We are going to go cook dinner. They don't say he and I or she and I. Like that, one. The individual consciousness is advised to dovetail with the supreme consciousness, as instructed by the Lord in Bhagavad Gita 1866, Sarvadharma Paritya Jamame Kamsharanam Praja. The individual consciousness, Arjuna, in Bhagavad Gita, is advised to dovetail with the supreme consciousness, and thus maintain his conscious purity. It is foolish to try to stop the activities of consciousness, but they can be purified when they're dovetailed with the Supreme. This consciousness is divided into 3 modes of self-identification according to the proportion of purity. Adhyatmika, or self-identification with the body and mind. Adibhotika, or self-identification with the material products. And Adidivika, or self-identification as a servant of the Lord. Of the three, Adidivika self-identification is the beginning of purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desire of the Lord. We'll stop there, see if there's any questions or comments. It's not, it seems kind of technical, it's not meant to like fill over your mind, but in the second canto, Lord Brahma tells Narada, when Narada inquires from his father Brahma about the absolute truth, Lord Brahma begins with describing the creation of the material world and the Purusha avatars, or the forms of Vishnu that are involved in the creation of the material world. And in that purport, Prabhupada says that a sincere devotee, they understand that hearing about the activities of the Purusha avatars in the creation of the material world is as good as hearing about the Lord's Rasa Leela. Okay, no,
Yeah, I was wondering in the verse where it says, the Lord divided himself by himself into the consciousness of the living entities. Is that describing the super soul, the Krishna Dakshaya Vishnu's expansion?
well, we're talking about specifically in this verse the Virat Purusha, who is Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. And he becomes, by expansion, he becomes the Shirodakashayi Vishnu, or the Paramatma within the heart of every living entity.
Is that what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, want to clarify. Thank you.
So, just to make sure, there's levels of consciousness ultimately leading to that pure state of consciousness, right?